The Colorado sun beat down mercilessly on Samuel Washington's broad shoulders as he guided his worn wagon along the dusty trail toward Cedar Ridge. Sweat trickled down his dark face, mixing with the grime from 3 days of traveling to nearby settlements, shoeing horses and repairing farm tools. The work was honest if scarce, and Sam had learned to take what he could get in a territory where a black man's skills were often questioned before they were valued. At 32, Sam carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who had survived the unthinkable. The scars on his back, hidden beneath his simple cotton shirt, told stories he rarely shared. 5 years since the Emancipation Proclamation, 3 years since the war's end, and still he felt the weight of chains that existed now only in memory and in the suspicious glances of townsfolk who wondered what a former slave was doing in their midst. The wagon wheels creaked rhythmically as Sam's old mule Moses plodded steadily homeward. Sam was thinking about the small order of horseshoes waiting in his forge when he heard it, a sound so faint he almost dismissed it as wind through the pine trees. But something made him pull the reins, bringing Moses to a halt. "Whoa there, boy," Sam murmured, tilting his head to listen. There it was again, a weak cry, barely human, coming from somewhere off the main trail. Sam's instincts, honed by years of danger and hardship, told him to keep moving. In this territory, stopping to investigate strange sounds could mean the difference between making it home and becoming another unmarked grave. But something in that cry spoke to a deeper part of him, the part that remembered what it felt like to call out for help and receive only silence. Securing his wagon, Sam grabbed his rifle and made his way through the underbrush. The cry came again, stronger now, definitely human and definitely in distress. Following the sound, Sam pushed through a thicket of scrub oak and found himself in a small clearing where the afternoon shadows were beginning to lengthen. What he saw there made his blood run cold. A young woman, no more than 25, was bound to a large pine tree with rough rope that had cut into her wrists. Her dark hair hung in tangled strands around a face marked by terror and exhaustion. Her dress, once probably a cheerful yellow, was torn and stained with dirt and blood. She had the olive skin and delicate features that marked her as Mexican, and when she saw Sam emerge from the trees, her eyes widened with a mixture of hope and fear. "Please," she whispered in accented English, her voice hoarse from calling for help. "Please, help me." Sam approached cautiously, his rifle ready. His years of caution warred with his natural compassion as he scanned the clearing for signs of a trap. Outlaws and worse had been known to use desperate people as bait, but one look at the woman's condition told him this was no deception. The rope burns on her wrists were real, as was the exhaustion that seemed to radiate from her small frame. "Ma'am," Sam said quietly, keeping his voice steady and reassuring. "I'm going to help you, but I need to know, are there others around? Anyone who might be watching?" She shook her head frantically. "They left yesterday, I think. Maybe longer. I don't know." Tears began to flow down her dirt-stained cheeks. "They killed me, Familia. Burned everything. Left me here to—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Sam lowered his rifle and moved quickly to her side. With gentle hands, he began working at the knots that bound her to the tree. The rope was thick and well tied, and he could see that whoever had done this had meant for it to be permanent. His jaw clenched as he worked, anger building in his chest at the cruelty of leaving another human being to die this way. "What's your name?" he asked softly, trying to keep her focused and calm as he worked. "Elena," she whispered. "Elena Martinez. My father. He had a ranch about 10 miles south of here. Had." The word came out broken, and Sam could hear the weight of fresh grief in it. "I'm Sam," he replied, finally loosening the last knot. "Sam Washington, and you're safe now." As the ropes fell away, Eleanor collapsed forward, her legs unable to support her after what must have been hours tied in the same position. Sam caught her gently, supporting her weight as she sobbed against his shoulder. For a moment, neither of them moved. Two people from different worlds, brought together by cruelty and chance in the middle of the Colorado wilderness. "Can you walk?" Sam asked, when her sobs began to subside. Elena tried to stand, but immediately stumbled. Her feet were swollen and cut, probably from trying to escape. Sam didn't hesitate. He swept her up in his strong arms, carrying her as easily as he might carry a child. "My wagon's just through here," he said. "I'll get you to town to the doctor." As he carried her through the underbrush, Elena looked up at his face with wonder. "Why?" she asked. "Why did you stop? Why help me?" Sam was quiet for a moment, thinking about all the times he had cried out for mercy and found none, all the moments when one person's kindness might have changed everything. Because everybody deserves a chance at tomorrow, he said finally, and because it's the right thing to do. So do you understand? The ride back to Cedar Ridge was slow and careful, with Elena drifting in and out of consciousness against Sam's shoulder as the wagon rolled over the uneven trail. Sam had wrapped her in his own blanket and given her sips of water from his canteen, but he could see she needed more help than he could provide on the trail. Her breathing was shallow, and fever was beginning to set in from her ordeal. Cedar Ridge came into view as the sun was setting, its handful of buildings casting long shadows across the dusty main street. The town wasn't much: a general store, a saloon, a small church, and Doc Peterson's office, but it was home to the nearly 200 souls trying to make a life in this corner of the Colorado Territory. Sam guided Moses toward the doctor's office, hoping Peterson would still be there despite the late hour. As the wagon rolled down Main Street, Sam noticed the usual collection of suspicious glances and whispered conversations that followed his movements through town. But tonight, the stares seemed more intense, more pointed. It wasn't until he pulled up in front of Doc Peterson's office that he realized why. A black man arriving in town with an unconscious Mexican woman was bound to stir up talk, especially in a place where both of their kinds were viewed with suspicion. Doc Peterson, a thin man in his 50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, emerged from his office as Sam carefully lifted Eleanor from the wagon. The doctor took one look at her condition and immediately stepped aside to let them in. "What happened to her?" Peterson asked, clearing his examination table with efficient movements. "Found her tied to a tree about 15 miles out," Sam replied, gently placing Elena on the table. "Says outlaws killed her family, burned their ranch. She's been out there at least a day, maybe more." Peterson nodded grimly as he began his examination. "Elena Martinez," he said quietly, recognizing her. "I treated her father for a broken arm last year. Good people, the Martinez family. Kept to themselves mostly, but good people." His face darkened. "I heard rumors about trouble out their way, but hoped they weren't true." As Peterson worked, cleaning Elena's wounds and checking for serious injuries, Sam stood awkwardly to one side. He wanted to help, but he also knew his presence might complicate things. In a town like Cedar Ridge, a black man showing too much concern for a Mexican woman could lead to questions and assumptions that might make life difficult for both of them. "She's dehydrated and exhausted, but nothing that won't heal with rest and care," Peterson said finally. "The rope burns are deep, and she's got some cuts on her feet, but she'll recover. Question is where. She can't go back to the ranch. If what she says is true, there's nothing left there, and she's got no other family that I know of." Sam had been wondering the same thing. Cedar Ridge didn't have much in the way of accommodations for a young woman with no money and no family. The boarding house was run by Mrs. Hartwell, who made no secret of her distaste for anyone who wasn't white and Protestant. The saloon was no place for a respectable woman. And the church, while charitable in theory, was led by Reverend Thompson, whose sermons often included pointed references to the proper place of different races. "I've got a spare room," Sam said quietly, the words coming out before he had fully thought them through. "Above my smithy, it's not much, but it's clean and safe." Peterson raised an eyebrow. "Sam, you sure about that? People talk in this town, and a young woman staying with a single man—" "People already talk about me," Sam replied with a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Can't get much worse. Besides, she needs help and I've got space. Sometimes it's that simple." Before Peterson could respond, Elena stirred on the examination table. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then gradually taking in her surroundings. When she saw Sam standing nearby, she tried to sit up. "Easy there," Peterson said gently, placing a restraining hand on her shoulder. "You're safe. You're in Cedar Ridge at my office. This is Sam Washington. He's the one who found you and brought you here." Eleanor looked at Sam with those dark eyes that seemed too old for her young face. "I remember," she said softly. "You carried me." She tried to smile, but it wavered with exhaustion and grief. "Thank you. How are you feeling?" Sam asked, stepping closer to the table. "Like I've been trampled by horses," Elena admitted. "But alive. That's more than I expected." Her voice caught slightly. "More than the rest of me familiar can say." Peterson cleared his throat gently. "Eleanor, we need to talk about where you'll stay while you recover. Sam here has offered his spare room, but I want you to know you have choices." The church might take you in, or perhaps we could find a family willing to— No, Eleanor said quickly, then seemed to realize how abrupt she sounded. I mean, if Mr. Washington is willing, I would be grateful to accept his offer. I don't want to be a burden on the church or on strangers who might not want me there. She looked directly at Sam. But I insist on paying my way somehow. I won't be charity. Sam nodded, understanding the pride behind her words. He had felt the same way many times since gaining his freedom, the need to earn his place rather than simply accept help. There's always work to be done around a smithy, he said. Cleaning, organizing, helping with customers. If you're willing to work, we can call it even. As Peterson finished bandaging Elena's wrists and gave her instructions for caring for her injuries, Sam found himself wondering what he had gotten himself into. Taking in Elena was the right thing to do. He was certain of that. But he also knew it would change things in Cedar Ridge, would shift the delicate balance he had managed to maintain in a town that barely tolerated his presence. Outside, he could already hear voices gathering, curious townspeople drawn by the sight of his wagon outside the doctor's office. Soon, everyone would know about the Mexican woman he had rescued, about her staying in his rooms above the smithy. Some would disapprove on moral grounds, others on racial ones. A few might even see it as an opportunity to cause trouble for the black man who had dared to establish himself as a legitimate businessman in their community. But as Sam helped Elena down from the examination table and offered her his arm for support, he found that he didn't care what they thought. For the first time since arriving in Cedar Ridge, he felt like he was doing something that mattered beyond mere survival. Elena Martinez had lost everything, her family, her home, her security. If he could help her rebuild, even in some small way, then maybe some good could come from all the bad they had both endured. The walk to his smithy was slow, with Elena leaning heavily on his arm. Behind them, Sam could feel the weight of watching eyes and hear the whisper of gossip beginning to spread. Tomorrow would bring questions, judgment, and probably trouble. But tonight, he was simply a man helping another human being find shelter from the storm. And for now, that was enough. The morning sun filtered through the small window of the room above Sam's smithy, casting gentle light across Elena's sleeping form. She had spent her first night in Cedar Ridge tossing and turning, crying out in her sleep as nightmares replayed the horror of watching her family die. Sam, sleeping on a makeshift bed in the main room below, had heard every distressed sound, but had resisted the urge to check on her, knowing that his presence might frighten her more than comfort her. When Elena finally emerged from the room, moving carefully down the wooden stairs, Sam was already at work in his forge. The rhythmic hammering of metal on metal had become a familiar morning sound in this part of town, and Eleanor found something comforting in its steady rhythm. She paused at the bottom of the stairs, watching Sam work. His movements were precise and practiced, each strike of the hammer serving a purpose. Sweat glistened on his dark skin as he shaped a horseshoe, his concentration complete. "Good morning," Elena said softly, not wanting to startle him. Sam looked up, setting down his hammer and wiping his hands on his leather apron. "Morning, how did you sleep?" Eleanor's hand unconsciously went to the bandages on her wrists. "Better than I expected, considering." She looked around the smithy, taking in the organized chaos of tools, the glowing forge, the half-finished projects waiting for attention. "You have a good business here." "It's honest work," Sam replied, his tone suggesting that this distinction mattered greatly to him. "Can I get you some breakfast? Nothing fancy, but I've got eggs and some bread." As Sam prepared a simple meal on the small stove in the corner, Eleanor studied him more carefully. In the light of day, she could see the careful way he carried himself, the alertness in his eyes that spoke of someone who had learned to be cautious. She had heard stories about the war, about slavery, about the men who had fought for their freedom, but she had never met someone who had lived through it. "Sam," she said as they sat down to eat, "yesterday you said you would help me because everyone deserves a chance at tomorrow, but that's not the only reason, is it?" Sam was quiet for a moment, chewing thoughtfully. "No," he admitted finally, "I guess it's not." He looked out the window toward the main street, where early morning shoppers were beginning their daily routines. "I know what it's like to be left for dead, to have people walk by like you don't matter, like you're not even human." Elena nodded slowly. "The men who killed mi familia, they looked at us the same way, like we were nothing more than animals to be slaughtered." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "But we were people. My father, Miguel, he could make anything grow. My mother, Rosa, she could sing so beautifully that birds would stop to listen. My brother Carlos was only 16, but he was already a better horseman than most grown men. Tears threatened, but she pushed them back. They had dreams, plans, hopes for the future. They mattered. They did, Sam agreed firmly, and so do you. That's why we'll figure out how to build you a new life here. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Through the open door of the smithy, they could see Sheriff Wade Morrison walking toward them, his badge gleaming in the morning sun. Morrison was a fair man by the standards of the territory, but he was also practical. He knew which battles were worth fighting, and which ones would only cause more trouble than they solved. "Morning, Sam," Morrison said, touching the brim of his hat. His eyes took in Elena sitting at the small table, noting her bandaged wrists and the careful way she held herself. "Miss Martinez, I presume. Doc Peterson told me what happened. I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you, Sheriff," Elena replied quietly. Morrison pulled up a chair, his expression serious. "I need to ask you some questions about what happened if you're up to it. The more details you can give me, the better chance we have of tracking down the men who did this." Elena's hands tightened on her coffee cup, but she nodded. "I'll tell you what I can remember." Over the next hour, Elena recounted the attack in painful detail. 5 men had ridden up to the Martinez ranch just before sunset 3 days ago. They had demanded food and shelter, and when Miguel Martinez had politely refused, saying they had little to spare, the men had grown violent. They had shot Carlos first, then Miguel when he tried to protect his son. Rosa had tried to run, but they had caught her and killed her too, laughing as they did it. "They kept me alive for their entertainment," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But when they were done with me, their leader, a man with a scar across his left cheek, said they should make an example, said other Mexican families needed to learn their place. So they tied me to that tree and rode off, expecting me to die slowly." Morrison's jaw was tight with anger as he took notes. "Can you describe the other men? Any other distinguishing marks or features?" Elena closed her eyes, forcing herself to remember. One was very tall, maybe 6.5 feet, with red hair. Another had a gold tooth in front. The leader with the scar, he had a tattoo on his hand, a snake, I think, and he wore a ring with a large green stone. "That sounds like Jake Morrison and his gang," the sheriff said grimly. "No relation to me, thank God. They've been causing trouble throughout the territory for months, always moving, never staying in one place long enough for us to catch them." He looked at Elena with sympathy. "I'll send word to the territorial marshal. Let him know they're operating in this area. But I have to be honest, men like that are hard to track down." After Morrison left, Elena sat quietly for a long time, staring out at the street. Sam continued his work, but he kept glancing at her, concerned by her silence. "I want to learn to shoot," Elena said suddenly. Sam paused in his hammering. "Ma'am?" Elena turned to face him, and he could see a new determination in her dark eyes. "I said I want to learn to shoot, to defend myself. I never want to feel that helpless again." Sam considered this request carefully. Teaching a woman to handle firearms wasn't unheard of on the frontier, but it also wasn't common, and teaching a Mexican woman might raise even more eyebrows in town. On the other hand, Elena's reasons were sound, and she had every right to protect herself. "I can teach you," he said finally, "but it means spending time together, practicing. People will talk." Elena stood up, and despite her small stature, there was something fierce in her posture. "Let them talk. I'm already the Mexican woman living above the black man's shop. What more can they say?" Sam couldn't help but smile at her defiant tone. "Well, when you put it like that," he set down his hammer. "We'll start this afternoon after the shop closes. There's a good spot about a mile out of town where we won't disturb anyone." As the day progressed, customers came and went from the smithy. Some were curious about Elena, asking pointed questions about her presence there. Others simply ignored her, as if she were invisible. But Elena noticed how they all treated Sam, with a grudging respect for his skills, but always maintaining a careful distance, as if his competence somehow threatened them. One customer, a rancher named Bill Hawkins, was more direct than most. "Sam, you sure it's wise having that woman staying here? People are starting to talk." Sam continued working on Hawkins' bridle repair without looking up. "People always talk, Mr. Hawkins. Doesn't mean they're saying anything worth listening to." Hawkins frowned. "I'm just saying, a man in your position needs to be careful about appearances. You've built something good here, don't let foolishness tear it down." Elena, who had been quietly sweeping the shop floor, stopped her work. Mr. Hawkins, she said politely but firmly, I understand your concern for Mr. Washington's reputation, but I assure you my presence here is purely practical. I have nowhere else to go, and I'm working to earn my keep. There's nothing improper about it. Hawkins looked surprised that she had spoken up. I didn't mean any offense, miss. Just looking out for my neighbors. After Hawkins left, Elena continued sweeping with perhaps more vigor than necessary. Does that happen often? She asked. Often enough, Sam replied. Most folks here tolerate me because I'm useful. But tolerance isn't the same as acceptance. They're always watching, waiting for me to give them a reason to run me out of town. Elena stopped sweeping and looked at him directly. Then we'll just have to make sure we don't give them one. But the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the meadow, where Sam had brought Elena for her first shooting lesson. About a mile from town, the spot was sheltered by a grove of cottonwoods, and far enough from any dwellings that the sound of gunfire wouldn't alarm the residents of Cedar Ridge. Sam had set up makeshift targets, old tin cans and pieces of wood, at varying distances. Elena stood beside him, holding his spare Colt revolver with both hands. The weapon felt heavy and foreign in her grip, despite Sam's patient instructions on proper stance and hold. She had been determined when they left the smithy, but now, faced with the reality of the gun in her hands, she felt a tremor of uncertainty. Remember what I told you about breathing? Sam said calmly, standing close enough to guide her, but not so close as to make her uncomfortable. Take a deep breath, let half of it out, then squeeze the trigger slowly and steadily. Don't jerk it. Eleanor nodded, focusing intently on the nearest tin can about 15 feet away. She took a breath, held it partially and squeezed. The gun kicked in her hands with more force than she had expected, and her shot went wide, sending up a puff of dirt several feet to the left of her target. Don't get discouraged, Sam said. That's better than most people do on their first try. You kept the gun steady and didn't flinch when it fired. That takes courage. They spent the next hour working on her technique. Eleanor was a quick learner, and her natural determination served her well. By the end of the session, she was hitting the tin cans more often than she missed, though her accuracy at longer distances still needed work. We'll practice again tomorrow, Sam said as they prepared to head back to town, and the day after that. Learning to shoot isn't just about hitting targets, it's about being comfortable with the weapon, knowing you can rely on it when you need to. As they walked back along the dusty trail, Eleanor was quiet, lost in thought. The physical act of shooting had awakened something in her, not just confidence, but a sense of her own agency that had been brutally stripped away during the attack on her family. Sam, she said finally, can I ask you something personal? I suppose. During the war, did you fight? Sam was quiet for so long that Elena began to wonder if she had overstepped. Finally, he spoke. I ran away from the plantation in Georgia when I was 25, made it to Union lines, and joined up with the 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment, fought in South Carolina mostly. Elena had heard of the colored regiments, the men who had fought for the Union cause and their own freedom. Were you afraid? Every day, Sam admitted, but I was more afraid of staying a slave than I was of dying free. Sometimes fear is what keeps you alive, and sometimes it's what gives you the courage to live. They were almost back to town when they encountered trouble. 3 men on horseback were waiting near the outskirts of Cedar Ridge, blocking the path back to the main street. Eleanor recognized the type immediately, troublemakers looking for an excuse to cause problems. She moved closer to Sam, instinctively seeking the protection of his presence. The leader of the 3, a heavy-set man with tobacco-stained teeth, spurred his horse forward. Well, well, if it isn't our local blacksmith and his Mexican girlfriend. Evening, Briggs, Sam said calmly, though Eleanor could see the tension in his shoulders. We're just heading home. That's what I wanted to talk to you about, Briggs replied, his tone deceptively conversational. See, some of the boys in town are concerned about the arrangement you've got going here. A single man and a single woman living together without proper Christian supervision. He leaned forward in his saddle. Looks unseemly. Elena felt anger flare in her chest. There's nothing unseemly about it. I'm a guest in Mr. Washington's home, nothing more. Briggs laughed unpleasantly. Sure you are, sweetheart, and I'm the King of England. He looked back at Sam. Here's the thing, boy. This town's got standards. Maybe it's time you remembered your place. The casual use of boy when addressing a grown man made Elena's blood boil, but Sam remained calm. My place is running my business and minding my own affairs, same as any other citizen. Citizen? One of Briggs's companions laughed. That's Rich. You hear that, boys? He thinks he's a citizen. Eleanor could see Sam's hands clenching at his sides, but his voice remained steady. The law says I am. The Constitution says I am. If you've got a problem with that, take it up with the federal government. Briggs's expression darkened. Don't get smart with me. I'm trying to do you a favor here, give you some friendly advice. Send the girl packing before things get complicated. And if I don't? The threat hung in the air for a moment before Briggs smiled coldly. Well, let's just hope it doesn't come to that. Accidents have a way of happening to folks who don't listen to reason. With that, the three men spurred their horses and rode off toward town, leaving Sam and Elena standing in the dust of their passage. Who was that? Elena asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Tom Briggs. He owns the saloon and thinks that makes him important. He's got friends who think the same way. Sam started walking again, his pace faster now. We need to be more careful. Men like that don't make idle threats. That evening, as Eleanor helped Sam close up the smithy for the day, she found herself thinking about what Briggs had said. The implication that her presence was somehow improper or immoral made her angry, but she also understood that Sam's position in the community was precarious. She had seen how some of the townspeople looked at him, the careful balance he maintained between asserting his rights and avoiding confrontation. Sam, she said as they climbed the stairs to their respective rooms, maybe Briggs is right. Maybe I should leave. Sam stopped on the stairs and turned to look at her. Is that what you want? Eleanor considered the question carefully. No, she admitted. I don't want to leave. For the first time since everything happened, I feel like I might be able to build something here. But I don't want to cause trouble for you. Elena, Sam said seriously, I've been dealing with men like Briggs my whole life. They don't need a reason to cause trouble. They'll make one up if they have to. The question isn't whether you staying here will cause problems. The question is whether we're strong enough to face those problems together. Elena looked into his eyes and saw not just determination, but something deeper, a recognition of shared struggle, of two people who had both lost everything and were trying to build something new from the ruins. Yes, she said firmly, we are. Outside, the night sounds of Cedar Ridge settled around them. Dogs barking in the distance, the faint sound of music from the saloon, the whisper of wind through the buildings. It was a peaceful sound, but Elena knew that peace was fragile. The confrontation with Briggs had reminded her that she and Sam were living on borrowed time, that their unlikely partnership was viewed with suspicion and hostility by some in the community. But as she prepared for bed in her small room, Eleanor felt something she hadn't experienced since before the attack on her family. Hope, not just for survival, but for the possibility of something better. She had learned to shoot today, had stood up to men who tried to intimidate her, had found in Sam Washington an ally who understood what it meant to fight for dignity in a world that often denied it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, she was certain of that. But tonight she was ready to face whatever came next. 3 weeks had passed since the confrontation with Tom Briggs, and an uneasy quiet had settled over Cedar Ridge. Eleanor had fallen into a routine that felt almost normal, helping Sam in the smithy during the day, practicing her shooting in the evenings, and slowly becoming a familiar sight around town. Some residents had begun to nod politely when they saw her, while others still crossed the street to avoid any interaction. But the open hostility had seemed to subside, and both Sam and Elena had begun to hope that perhaps they could build a peaceful life together in the small frontier town. That hope was shattered on a dusty Thursday morning when Sheriff Morrison burst through the door of the smithy, his face grim with urgency. Sam, Elena, you need to come with me right now, he said, breathing heavily as if he had been running. Jake Morrison and his gang rode into town about 10 minutes ago. They're asking questions about Eleanor, and they don't seem inclined to take no for an answer. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. The nightmare she had tried to put behind her was suddenly very real again. How many of them? She asked, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded. 5, same as before, Morrison replied. They're at the saloon right now, but it won't take them long to figure out where you are. We need to get you somewhere safe. Sam was already moving, grabbing his rifle from behind the counter and checking that it was loaded. Where can we go? If they're determined to find her, they'll search every building in town. The church, Morrison said. Reverend Thompson might be a pain in the neck, but he won't turn over someone seeking sanctuary, and the building's got good sight lines. We can see them coming. Elena shook her head firmly. No, I won't hide in a church while other people risk their lives for me. These men killed my family. They left me to die. If they want to finish what they started, let them come. Elena, Sam said quietly, this isn't about proving anything. This is about staying alive. No, Elena replied, meeting his eyes with a determination that reminded him of the woman who had insisted on learning to shoot, who had refused to be charity, who had chosen to stay despite the social pressure to leave. This is about more than staying alive. It's about refusing to let evil men dictate how we live our lives. Before either man could argue further, the sound of approaching hoofbeats echoed from the main street. Through the open door of the smithy, they could see 5 riders coming toward them at a steady pace. The man in the lead matched Elena's description perfectly, tall, lean, with a jagged scar running across his left cheek from his ear to the corner of his mouth. Well, well, Jake Morrison called out as his gang pulled up in front of the smithy. Looks like our little Mexican bird didn't die after all. That's disappointing. I hate unfinished business. Elena stepped forward, positioning herself where the outlaws could see her clearly. Sam moved to stand beside her, his rifle held ready, but not yet raised. Sheriff Morrison took position near the door, his hand resting on his pistol. Your business with me died with my family, Elena said, her voice carrying clearly across the street. You have no reason to be here. Jake Morrison laughed, a sound devoid of any humor. Oh, but I do. See, we heard you've been talking to the law, describing us to anyone who will listen. That makes you a problem that needs solving. The whole territory knows what you are, Sheriff Morrison interjected. Killing her won't change that. One of Morrison's men, the tall redhead Elena had described, spat tobacco juice into the dust. Maybe not, but it'll make us feel better. And it'll send a message to anyone else thinking about crossing us. Elena could feel Sam tensing beside her, could sense his readiness to fight, but she also knew that a gunfight in the middle of town would likely end badly for all of them. These men had nothing to lose, while Sam had built a life here that he was trying to protect. You want me? Elena called out. Then face me, one-on-one. If you win, you ride away and never bother this town again. If I win, you and your men leave and never come back. Jake Morrison's scarred face split into a grin. You? Challenge me to a gunfight? He looked around at his men, who were chuckling at what they saw as an absurd proposal. Little lady, I've killed more men than you've probably even met. Maybe, Elena replied calmly, but you've never faced someone who has nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The laughter died away as Morrison studied her face, seeing something there that made him reconsider his easy dismissal. You're serious. Dead serious. Sam grabbed Elena's arm gently. Elena, you don't have to do this. We can find another way. Elena looked at him with eyes that held both fear and fierce determination. Yes, I do. These men took everything from me. My family, my home, my innocence. They made me a victim, but I don't have to stay one. She turned back to Morrison. What do you say? Are you brave enough to face one small Mexican woman, or do you only fight when you have 4 men backing you up? Morrison's face darkened at the challenge to his courage. Fine. But when I kill you, your friend there dies too, and anyone else in this town who tries to interfere. And when I kill you, Elena replied, your men ride away. Give me your word on that. The outlaw leader looked around at his gang, seeing their surprised faces, but also their nods of agreement. In their world, such challenges were matters of honor, even among killers. You have it, he said finally. Sheriff Morrison stepped forward. This is madness. I can't allow— Sheriff, Elena interrupted. With respect, this isn't your choice. It's mine. The crowd that had been watching from doorways and windows began to gather in the street, drawn by the drama unfolding before them. Eleanor saw familiar faces, Doc Peterson, Reverend Thompson, even Tom Briggs. All of them watching to see what would happen to the Mexican woman who had dared to make a life in their town. Eleanor and Jake Morrison faced each other in the dusty street, about 20 paces apart. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and Eleanor could feel sweat trickling down her back despite the coolness she tried to project. Morrison stood relaxed, confident, his hand resting casually near his gun. He had done this many times before, and it showed. Any last words, little bird? Morrison taunted. Elena thought of her father's gentle hands teaching her to tend the garden, of her mother's beautiful voice singing lullabies, of her brother's infectious laughter. She thought of Sam's quiet strength and unwavering support. of the new life they had begun to build together. All of it had led to this moment, to this choice between fear and courage. "Yes," she said clearly. "My name is Elena Martinez. I am the daughter of Miguel and Rosa Martinez, sister to Carlos Martinez. They were good people who deserved better than what you gave them, and I am not your victim anymore." The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Somewhere in the crowd, a child whimpered and was quickly hushed. A horse stamped impatiently, and the wind stirred dust devils in the street. Then Morrison's hand moved toward his gun, and Elena's training took over. Sam's patient lessons, the hours of practice, the muscle memory built through repetition, all of it came together in one fluid motion. She drew her Colt, aimed, and fired in what seemed like a single heartbeat. Morrison's gun cleared his holster, but Elena's bullet found its mark first, striking him center mass. The outlaw leader looked down at the spreading red stain on his shirt with an expression of profound surprise, then crumpled to the ground. For a moment, nobody moved. Morrison's men sat frozen on their horses, staring at their fallen leader. The townspeople stood in shocked silence. Even Eleanor seemed stunned by what she had just accomplished. Then Sam was beside her, his strong hand on her shoulder, steadying her as the reaction set in. "It's over," he said quietly. "You did it." The red-haired outlaw finally found his voice. "Jake's dead," he said, as if he couldn't quite believe it. He looked at Elena with something that might have been respect. "A deal's a deal. We're riding out." Sheriff Morrison stepped forward. "You do that, and if I see any of you in this territory again, I'll shoot you on sight." As the 4 remaining outlaws gathered their leader's body and prepared to leave, Elena felt her legs begin to shake. The gun slipped from her nerveless fingers, and Sam caught her as she swayed. "I can't believe I did that," she whispered. "Believe it," Sam replied. "You faced down the worst thing in your life and came out the winner. Your family would be proud." As the crowd began to disperse, many of the townspeople approached Elena and Sam. Some offered congratulations, others simply nodded respectfully. Even Tom Briggs, who had been so hostile before, tipped his hat. "That took real courage, miss," he said grudgingly. "Real courage." Doc Peterson checked Elena for shock, while Sheriff Morrison handled the aftermath of the gunfight. Reverend Thompson, surprisingly, offered a prayer of thanksgiving for Elena's safety and the town's deliverance from the threat of the outlaw gang. That evening, as Sam and Elena sat on the small porch behind his smithy, watching the sunset paint the Colorado mountains in shades of gold and purple, Eleanor finally allowed herself to believe that the nightmare was truly over. "What happens now?" she asked. Sam considered the question carefully. "Now we keep building. Your reputation in town just changed completely. You're not just the Mexican woman staying with the blacksmith anymore. You're the woman who faced down Jake Morrison and lived to tell about it. That means something here." Elena leaned back in her chair, feeling a peace she hadn't known in months. "I want to stay," she said. "Not just because I have nowhere else to go, but because I want to be here. With you, in this place we're making together." Sam smiled, and for the first time since she had known him, it reached his eyes completely. "I'd like that too, more than I can say." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Elena thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had lost everything, her family, her home, her innocence. But she had also found something she never expected, a partner who understood her struggles, a community that had learned to respect her strength, and most importantly, a future that belonged to her alone. The chains of her past, slavery for Sam, victimhood for Eleanor, had been broken, not by others, but by their own courage and determination to refuse the limitations others would place on them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove themselves, new chances to build the life they had chosen together. But tonight, they were free, and that was enough. 6 months later, the sign outside the smithy read, "Washington and Martinez, blacksmithing and metalwork." Elena had proven as skilled with metalwork as she was with a gun, and their partnership had flourished both personally and professionally. The town of Cedar Ridge had grown around them, and they had become integral parts of its fabric, not despite their differences, but because of the strength those differences had given them. Years later, when people told the story of the day Elena Martinez faced down Jake Morrison in the dusty Main Street, they would speak of courage and justice, of the power of ordinary people to overcome extraordinary evil. But Elena and Sam knew the real truth, that freedom isn't something given to you by others, but something you take for yourself, one choice at a time, one day at a time, until you finally become the person you were always meant to be.